Hello, good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Time now. Hello, good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Time now to take a look at the papers, and here with me to go through them are Christian Calgie, senior political correspondent at the Daily Express, and the journalist Benjamin Butterworth. So welcome back to both of you. We dealt with a lot of the front pages in the last hour, talking about yesterday's protests and all the political heat around them as well. And there are a few we didn't get to, and it is the story that's dominating the pages. So Christian, take us to the Sunday Telegraph's take on this, and they're quoting the Prime Minister on their front page.
Yes, it leads with Rishi Sunak's response, which was very much, saying that there was violence and thuggery on both sides, and commending the police for largely dealing with the violence, which I think is actually very interesting, because it's Boris Johnson also put out a statement yesterday that was very much more attacking the pro-Palestinian lot, and I think some on the right are standing with Mr. Johnson this morning, more so than with Rishi's even-handed response. There's also some lines about Rishi Sunak set to meet with Mark Rowley to seek further reassurance that anti-Semitic hate crimes will be followed up, and an interesting detail that the Sunday Telegraph reveal, which is that the government's independent advisor on political violence is to recommend a change to the law to let the police ban marches based on their impact on the Jewish community. And I've seen testimony doing the rounds that a lot of Jews in London were particularly worried to be out and about over the course of the last 5 weeks now, actually, on the Saturdays that these are taking place. So I think that would be a very welcome development.
Well, yeah, and the Prime Minister did say he was going to hold Sir Mark Rowley to account after he had said that he didn't believe that the intelligence that they had gave him the authority to ban the marches. He said it didn't meet that threshold because they didn't think that the risk of disorder was high enough earlier in the week. So no big surprise that the Prime Minister will be talking to the police in the aftermath.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's a very difficult situation, because look, there clearly was violence in the pro-Palestinian march, but the overwhelming majority of people there were perfectly reasonable and civilized, and so I think it's quite right that it wasn't banned, in my opinion. But then you have this other problem, that the very nature, in a general sense, of these marches are making Jewish people feel uncomfortable, feel threatened, feel unsafe to go out and about. And how do you square that circle? There were 300,000 people on the protest yesterday, which is more than the total number of Jewish people in this country altogether, and you can see that it's making them feel unsafe. But then, the right to protest is a very real one, and they're entitled to their views. And I think that's where the government finds itself in this tricky position, because, how many Saturdays will this go on for? It seems like it will be in perpetuity at the moment.
Well, that's right. And yesterday we did see violent scenes from far-right counter-protesters, as the police call them, who tried to get to the cenotaph. They say they wanted to defend it, but they ended up in clashes with the police there. Are we likely to see scenes like that carrying forward? Because that's the worst we've seen today.
Well, I very much hope not, and I hope that they were uniquely inspired out by the nature of the day that the protest fell on. Now, Armistice Day. It remains to be seen. By the looks of it, the police intelligence was rather good, and their handling of the far-right protesters was largely competent. The worry is that if they do continue, if they come out next week, if they come out in larger numbers next week, when there aren't already barriers and protections around the cenotaph for the events that are happening today, if those two groups had come together, then the police could have very rapidly lost control of the situation. So it remains to be seen whether that was wholly very good police intelligence, or frankly an element of luck around numbers and around routes that the two groups took.
But then, of course, they could say this march is banned, but of course there would still be people, probably a couple of thousand at least, that would come out, you would definitely have these far-right yobs because they don't care about whether it's a legal protest or not. And so, it's not as simple as saying we'll ban it and therefore it won't happen. It's about trying to manage these emotions of these people and these intentions. And that's a lot more complicated than I think some politicians would let on.
That's right. And the police would say we did manage to keep the two groups apart and we did manage to protect the cenotaph, so they will no doubt feel that they did their job. We'll probably get lots of analysis of that. But let's go to the Mail on Sunday. We can see it there. And this was another scene that the Mail's picked up on, which was Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove being jostled as he went to the station, I think, to go home.
Yeah. I mean, it's very concerning scenes. So train stations have been a focus of some of these protesters as a way to sort of lock them down, as doing mass protests, as they did at London's Victoria Station yesterday. And Michael Gove was caught in quite the tussle, presumably just going home as its normal Saturday, and he had to be escorted by a considerable number of police through the station. I think he was put in a car as soon as he got outside, and that raises serious questions about politicians' safety, about his safety in particular, because there were lots of chants of shame on you. Now, Michael Gove, if you cast your mind back, the man who murdered Sir David Amess, Michael Gove had been the target of that murderer before. That came out in the court case. And so when you think about this man's safety in particular, the idea that he was thrown to this sort of mob in this train station, I think raises very serious questions.
Yeah, worrying times. And talking of politicians from a different point of view, we discussed this in the last hour, but there is a lot of discussion around it. To what extent the Home Secretary's rhetoric this week has perhaps inflamed tensions. The Times picks up on her and the week ahead.
Yes, and I think this is slightly more interesting behind-the-scenes look at some of the Suella Braverman aspects of the stories we've been talking about. So obviously some of the left-wing papers calling for her to resign, but there's also the very real threat to Rishi Sunak that she may quit, or she is deliberately provoking him into sacking her. Now,
because of leadership ambition?
Well, I think there's partly that. There are genuine
cynic.
policy clashes. Obviously, the focal point now that he didn't choose to sack her last week is going to be Wednesday, when the Supreme Court judge on Rwanda. There's also a government source in this Sunday Times piece that suggests that Braverman's provocative Times op-ed was partly as a way to distract from her comments earlier in the week about tents, which of course I think really was this is what's done so.
Homelessness being a lifestyle choice.
Yes, which is what's done so much damage to her. Is that she's made controversial comments in the past, but 2 in 1 week is pretty difficult to manage in terms of Downing Street.
What do you think her reasoning is behind her behaviour? What do you think she's up to?
I think the reality is that she is being herself. There's certainly an element of politicking here. There's also an element which is that she is an outspoken right-wing person, and she knows that Rishi Sunak needs her just as much, if not slightly more, than she needs Rishi Sunak. She represents a significant view within the Conservative Party. She's firmly on the right, as I've said before in other studios. There are many Conservative MPs who were very pro-Boris, were quite liked Liz Truss, and actually Suella Braverman's presence in government has been quite reassuring to those Conservative MPs, that even though Rishi Sunak may not naturally be a bedfellow, the fact that she's still Home Secretary is reassuring to them.
But there are a lot of Tory MPs very uncomfortable with what she said as well. What do you think might happen this week, Benjamin?
Well, I mean, I do think it's all about leadership ambitions in many ways. I think that's a motivation behind some of her controversies. But what you have here is quite a dysfunctional government, because Christian's absolutely right that Rishi Sunak needs her. He needs the right-wing supporters, the right-wing Tory MPs that she brings on board. It's an essential part of his coalition. Some could argue it's the only reason he's Prime Minister. When she backed him, that was the deal done. And yet, it's ridiculous to have a situation where the Home Secretary is opining on sensitive topics, writing an op-ed in the Times that Downing Street says they didn't see the final version of, they didn't know what she was going to say. You know, government isn't meant to work like that. The Prime Minister is meant to be in charge. And as other people have said, you know, clearly she's not afraid of the Prime Minister. She's doing what she wants. And that's not sustainable. That's not how an office as important as the Home Office is meant to run. They're meant to be careful people.
A very quick answer from both of you. What's your prediction? Reshuffle next week? Will she get moved out of her?
Oh, this is going to be replayed and humiliate me. I think reshuffle next week and possibly moved out.
I think she wants to be outsider, not outside the tent. I think she'll stay in office.
Okay, interesting. Well, I like it when you don't agree. We'll get you back and find out whether you're right later. Anyway, lovely to have your company this morning. Thanks so much for joining us and talking us through the papers. Thank you. You're watching Sky News Breakfast.